The first question is, what do you think the biggest change in the way the U.S. does business internationally has been during the past 20 years, and what's been the most important lesson learned?
Okay, what I can talk about is the Western Hemisphere. So for me,
Exactly.
that's what I work on. That's Canada through Argentina and Mexico and the Caribbean. If you went back 20 years, we're talking about 1991. And I think what you found in 1991 is that the world had changed dramatically, the hemisphere had. We'd had the huge economic debt, we'd had debt crisis, we'd had the collapse of the Berlin Wall, we'd had the Soviet model, which was clearly fell out of favor, and there was a rush towards free market policies, and I think you saw that throughout the hemisphere. The trick then is to not just to say, well, we're a free market country, but you got to put programs in place to support that. And it's not just the policies, a trade policy or an economic policy. There are a number of things that you have to do. You need a better education base. You have to have people trained to be able to take advantage of open markets. So I think that's where the change has been, and that's where the challenge remains.
To that end, what do you think the role of higher education, but also secondary education, should be in moving people away from just knowing they should be doing more to actually being able to do more?
Well, I think you have to take a look at education. I think you're talking about K through postgraduate here. I think there are a number of things that countries need to do. I think we need to have a greater focus on science, on math. I think we've got a hemisphere that produces a lot of, I'm not disparaging any careers because one of these is mine, but doctors, lawyers, political scientists, poets, and they're all noble professions. But if your idea is to produce the next generation cell phone, or to launch your own satellite, or to be able to put somebody on Mars, I doubt that a degree in poetry is the one that's going to get you there. So you need a balance, because these other things are extremely good and useful. But insofar as growing economies, if you want to be on the cutting edge of whatever, this could be agriculture, it could be textiles and apparel, auto parts, it doesn't make any difference what you're talking about. You need that education. And we got to, I think, understand not only the value of education, but how do you deliver it? I think there's some wonderful examples across this country. One of the ones that's always fascinated me is the Ron Clark Academy in Atlanta. The Ron Clark Academy is a middle school exercise, and this is a school that's built in the middle of a disadvantaged neighborhood. And by disadvantaged, I mean about as disadvantaged as you can get. But before these kids graduate from middle school, which is 9th grade, they visited every continent. And these are inner city kids, who probably think that the world ends about 8 or 9 blocks from their house. But suddenly they're exposed to a whole world out there to get them to understand and appreciate why education is important. So that's one. I think we need to take a look hemisphere-wide at the value of junior college education. Junior college education is a concept that has not yet arrived in most of the hemisphere. As a matter of fact, I think if you get out of Canada and the United States, there's one. And that is a joint venture between LaGuardia College and the Junior College and the Community College in New York and Universidad Central in Santiago, Chile. They haven't even graduated their first class yet. They graduated this year. But there are reasons for junior colleges fill a tremendous need, or they address a tremendous need. Not everybody needs to go to four-year school. You can pick up some of the skills that you need for certain industries. You can do that in a couple of years. Not everybody can afford to go to four-year college right off the bat. Some people have to work for a while. So that's an example. We've got to take a look at our postgraduate studies too. Something that I think is of huge benefit in this country is the value of private sector funded academic research. That's a concept that not all of the world has embraced yet. We have major universities in this country that live off of that. These are some of the concepts, some of the work that needs to be done. We have to start our kids early, and we have to ensure that they've got good academic institutions, that carry them all the way through. at the end, giving them the opportunity to find higher paying jobs, cutting edge jobs. And the beauty of that is because, it's no secret that generally the higher tech jobs pay more. And then when you take a look at the whole economic chain, okay, so they're going to get better paying jobs, working for companies that in theory they will make more money, they'll pay more taxes. We can take care of the social needs of the country, but we take care of the welfare of our own people at the same time.
What is the Department of Commerce doing to extend some of these educational ideas or efforts to improve the impact of what the U.S. is trying to do in its education system?
Well, keep in mind, first, we're not the Department of Education, okay? So this is just something that we focused on because we're clearly interested in, let me back. In the State of the Union address, the President announced the National Export Initiative. And this is a move to grow our economy and create jobs, and we've got metrics that are going to carry us out to the 5-year point to do this. And it's a really ambitious goal. So I think part of what we need to do is to encourage authorities here to take a look, among other things. We got a myriad of things to look at, but let's take a look at the education system and what do we need to do there. We've got some interesting programs that we have developed. And if I could give you a couple of examples, because I really get excited about these, so I can talk about them. As long as the camera's rolling, I can't stop.
Please do.
The one, a relationship between the University of Maryland and education officials in Uruguay. Now this isn't the normal, let's exchange students. This is, let's keep the students at home. But let's have the kids at the University of Maryland, the students there, do market research for Uruguayan firms that want to penetrate the U.S. market. You do this for credit. And the Uruguayans are doing market research for U.S. companies that might want to do business in Uruguay. So it's real practical. The metric is built in. I mean, you either make it or you don't make it, and you make money, and that's how you do it. Secondly, and I don't mean to focus all of this on Uruguay, but as an example of what we're looking at, Uruguay is the only country in the hemisphere that's implemented one laptop per child. So these are middle school kids that all have their own laptops. So working with the University of Nebraska at Lincoln and Creighton University in Omaha, trying to come up with software so the kids do something really useful with their computers besides play video games. And so, trying to build that in. Now that supports the Uruguayan president's interest in education. Now you've got something, now we're taking that the next step. Nicaragua. The Nicaraguans are beginning to implement one laptop per child, and they're doing it outside of the capital city, but up in the northern part of the country. What we are looking at is, okay, let's take what we learned in Uruguay. Okay, we can use that same software. What else can we do with that computer? Can we give them the links to, and this is a commerce aspect, to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is part of the Department of Commerce, but it includes things like the National Weather Service, which is part of Secretary Gary Locke's domain. So the parents now can use that to say, when do I plant? When do I harvest? What's the weather forecast for the next 6 months? These types of things. So they can do, so you've got this tool for the child, but also begin to bring the parents into the same thing. So those are some things that we're trying to do. We're also, I'll mention another one, and I think is extremely important, and that is working with historically black colleges and universities and other minority-serving institutions. We have some excellent historically black colleges and universities in the United States. They don't have all the resources maybe that a Harvard has. Who does? Nobody does. But they've got some technologies and some expertise in certain areas that is absolutely cutting edge. So it might be in the textile and apparel area. It might be in agriculture. How do we engage those universities and their students to begin to look outside? And that does a couple things. I think it's good for the universities, it's good for the students, it's good for the faculty to get them to focus on other things. But it also, if we do this right and they see that this really works, it gains a whole new constituency for trade.
Absolutely.
Which I think is important. We have to be sure across this country that people understand the value of trade. Trade gets a bad rap.
It does.
And I think it's our job to show, it's our responsibility to show that this creates jobs, that trade creates jobs, that trade gives me a better standard of living, gives you a better standard of living. And we have to hammer that message. But those are some of the things that we're taking a look at.
That's very exciting. Just to share a little bit about what we're doing with Governor State University in Chicago. We're partnering our faculty with their faculty. We're creating some one-on-one mentoring relationships. We're sending their faculty overseas for faculty development and bringing them back, and then they're actually doing work in the classroom with the help of our faculty to help their students engage and understand that the world is bigger than what they know it as. So I think it's a good thing. I think that we need to be doing more.
Yeah, we do, and we have to show what the value of education is, and I think that's absolutely fundamental. And it's not many of political issues that make a difference where they are, right? I mean, they have a built-in time frame. Changes in education are generational.
Absolutely.
And so we have to be able, one, to show that trade is good, that we can make changes now that are pretty immediate and you can see the results pretty quickly, but good enough to sustain also the interest and the inertia to be able to allow us to address these really systemic issues that take, as I said, long, it can take 20 years to address.
Well, and it's one of the things that many of the universities, higher education, they're trying to get their arms around is how do you graduate business students and MBAs that are able to go out into the world and engage. Some would argue that we've been doing that quite well over the past several generations. Some would argue that we're pretty well entrenched in our own view of the world, and we haven't taught our students to look at different ways of doing things. What can higher educational institutions do with their students to help what you're trying to accomplish out in the workforce, out in the world?
I think in some cases, that's a really interesting question, and it's one I want to be careful how I answer. But I'll give you an example of something that really did surprise me. I went to a major university in the United States, and I was talking to a group of students that were seniors in business students and MBA students, and the faculty, and there are probably 200 people in an auditorium. So I know that they're better educated than I am because education's better today than when I went to school. So they're pretty smart kids. And I asked the question, you try to engage the audience. So I said, well, I work on trade and free trade agreements. What do you think what is a free trade agreement? And there's complete silence. It's that deafening sound of 200 people saying nothing. Now, I'm pretty amazed because these are pretty smart kids. I assume the faculty's pretty smart, but nobody has an answer for me. So, like an idiot, I keep pursuing this. And I said, okay, well, if you were negotiating a free trade agreement, what would you put into it? And I think, well, okay, what's important in trade? Finally somebody says tariffs. I said to myself, I can work with that. But I didn't let go. Okay, so then I said, okay, well, give me something else. I'm expecting someone to talk about non-tariff barriers, transportation issues, whatever it happens to be. Nothing came. And finally somebody way in the back of the room yells, good neighbor policy. Well, that's a Roosevelt-era policy that didn't have much to do with free trade. So, but that's what I went up against. So we've got to do a better job of, I think, and some schools do a magnificent job of this. But we have to be sure that people understand the positive role that trade plays. And it's not just in the area of export sales. It's giving you, the consumer, a greater variety of products to choose among. That's about it. It does improve the welfare. We can produce things more cheaply. Now, I'm not suggesting, don't get me wrong, that we endorse exporting jobs. That's not what I'm talking about at all. But there are a number of areas where the supply from abroad is good, and it goes across all fields. We need to take a look at that and ensure that people have an appreciation for that. So I think that's a role for academic institutions to play, to open the eyes of young men and women to the opportunities. Now, one other thing too that I'd like to mention is, and that's the role of small business. When you take a look at the new jobs that are being created in the United States, most of those are being created by small business. And we need to take a look, we need to have an approach for small business, and we're developing this at the department. So, I mean, this isn't, you know, I'm not suggesting something that my bosses aren't smart enough to figure out on their own, but we have to figure, what I want to point out is that we're stressing this, and that is the role of small business. And I've mentioned the president has this initiative. So one of the things that we're taking a look at is, where do most first-time exporters ship to? Well, it's not going to surprise you that the largest single destination, I think it's about 40%, goes to Canada. Well, that makes sense. But most of Canada, they speak the same language, you know, I mean, Quebec aside, but they speak the same, it's English. You can literally, if it's not a large product, you can walk it across the border. You know, it's the transportation, I mean, you can follow the transaction, so it makes it easy. Okay, of those companies, where else might that product be sold? Where's their market for it? And again, I work in the Western Hemisphere, but if you're selling to Canada, maybe can you market that product in Mexico? And now we've got free trade agreements with these countries, which makes that product from that company very attractive to buyers in Canada and Mexico, because the product gets in generally duty-free. So taking a look at, you know, what more can we do for small business? How do we find, and maybe the market isn't, maybe it's a niche market in Paraguay, okay? But those are the things that we're trying to do. And we're looking at, clearly, you take a look at Canada and Mexico, because they're our two largest export markets. It also accounts for a very significant, and I don't remember the exact percentage, but of our global exports. I mean, yeah, just a little fact that I like to throw out. The value of trade that goes back and forth across our southern border with Mexico, is about $500,000 a minute. Wow. Wow is right. Now think about Canada, it's $1 million a minute. Double wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what but we're not taking full advantage of those markets, and we're still leaving money on the table.
Right.
You know, so how do let's maximize that. What's a huge emerging market globally? It's Brazil. What are we doing in Brazil? What are our competitors doing? So one of the things that we're taking a look at is, who's making the inroads there? What are they doing? What should we be doing? What's the effort of the United States government? It's not just at the federal level. These are things that can be done at the state level. Governors play a huge role in this. Local economic development agencies play a huge role in this. What should we be doing? And then countries like Colombia, you know, taking a look at that, countries with which we have free trade agreements. We have free trade agreements with 17 countries in the world. And I would put just as an aside, for asterisk. Many of our competitors have many more free trade agreements than we do, and it's starting to cost us money. But we have 17 worldwide, 12 of those are in Latin America. Shouldn't we be taking a real look at how we maximize the benefit out of those?
Right.
And you know, we've got a couple pending trade agreements, show what the value is in those. So there's a lot of stuff out there, and I don't mean to bog you down with it all.
How do you get that message across to? I look at our MBA students, and I see an incredible amount of energy and an incredible amount of motivation to go out into the world and do better and do good and all that. But how do you teach them? How do you engage them in parts of the world that they wouldn't necessarily put at the top of their list? Whether it's Colombia or I don't know, Costa Rica or places where business is ripe for the taking, but there's this perception of fear and other challenges that go with it.
Well, I do think that there is a need you have to differentiate among the countries, number one. You don't always have to, you know, we export to virtually every country in the world, okay, regardless of type of government, whether it's right, left, or centrist. I mean, you know, our companies can sell in those markets. In places that have horrible weather conditions, we sell there. In countries that have security issues, we sell there. And we buy from them. I mean, it's just, there is the fear of the unknown. And I think that's part of what we need to do. But it's not just us. It's also those governments need to do a better job of talking about the advantages of doing business in fill in the blank.
Right.
So there's an education process in that one.
What areas of international trade you feel are changing most rapidly and require more educational, or more importantly, more research effort to be able to keep up with and to do better in?
Well, I think clearly high tech. And I think the thing that's changed the most, and I've been here at the Department of Commerce for decades, sometimes my colleagues have to wipe the dust off of me. But it's technology. It's the use of, and this goes back to your previous question. Okay, you're talking about it, and I know that probably the underlying question you asked is what about security? Okay, so you go back. Do you have to go to every one of these countries today? No. Use video conferencing. Now, granted, I don't think personally that anything is better than the handshake and the face-to-face meeting.
Right.
Sometimes that's just not practical. Security may be another one reason. Two, it's more expensive.
Right.
But I can say, okay, let's have an hour video conference. I'll show you my product. I can demonstrate this side or the other. I can talk to you about the service that I've got. And I think the wise, the sage use of technology is what has probably changed the most, and how quickly communications, the speed of communications. You have a faulty product, the whole world knows about it like that. If I want to find out something about you, I go online. If I want to know what you're doing at the University, or Indiana University, bang. That's not hard for me to do.
Right.
For the good, bad, and ugly, that's online, but it's all there. So to me, I think the biggest change has been in the technology area and our inability to get the most out of it.
Right.
And I think that's a role for universities. And I remember the first time I went out to the business school out at Southern California at USC. The first time I'd been into this graduate business program. First time I'd seen virtually every student has a computer. Not, for all I know, they're emailing each other and saying, who's this jerk who's giving the talk today? But I hope that's not the case. But but you need more of that. And I don't think that we take full advantage. I was really quite impressed by this. Goes back a number of years. And I remember thinking, wow, this is really something. This changes the whole the dynamics in the classroom.
Right.
So I think it's
Learning how to use that and to communicate better. You were talked about small businesses a little bit earlier. What do you think some of their biggest stumbling blocks are in terms of getting out and doing more business internationally, growing internationally?
I think part of it is simply it's economics. And it's economics in the way we would think about it, which is financial, cost, but it's also resources. If you've got a truly small business, and you've got you've got 8 employees, and the CEO wants to go out and develop a market abroad, it's quite a different set of considerations than a Fortune 500 company has. There, the CEO can go and it doesn't have any effect on company operation. But if you've got a 7 or 8 person firm, everybody's playing an absolutely vital role in the production of the product or service. So they have to give a lot more consideration to it. That's one. 2, and this goes again back to your question about fear of going overseas. You've got the built-in fear of the unknown, okay, or concern for the unknown. That's clearly part of it. But then there are the issues, there are legal issues. The whole world isn't built on a legal system with English common law. You've got the Napoleonic Code that most of our colleagues in Latin America are using. It changes. Consequently, business codes are different. Business legislation is different. So you have to really be aware of that. And then you've got the whole issue of transparency. You'd like to think if you're going overseas that 2 things happen. One is people are just kind of oblivious, I think, to the changes. They don't understand that these things are going to be there. They think that if I'm selling from Bloomington to Boise, it's the same as selling from Bloomington to Bogota, and it ain't. It doesn't go that way. And so I think you have to research your client as well. We have a preponderance of market share in Latin America, across the hemisphere. But we at the same time, we've got an awful lot of competition. So I think that we need to do a better job. Small companies need to do a really good job of researching markets.
We were talking about emerging markets.
Yes.
And you see some U.S. businesses and certainly some universities starting to get engaged in the emerging markets from a social enterprise point of view.
Yes.
What kind of value do you see that having, short-term, long-term, and to what extent should U.S. businesses be looking at getting engaged, like Brazil as an emerging economy, in this, that from a world responsibility point of view, not just from a social responsibility point of view, not just from an economic point of view, or are they the same?
Okay, so you've got two questions in that. Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. This is your dime. You can have as many questions. I think education is a service, and you can export services. Okay, so I think that's extremely important. I view education, I mean, not beyond the social value that it's got, and yeah, obviously educational value, but I see it as an export. And a joint venture between LaGuardia Community College in New York and the university in Chile, that's an export. That's an export of technology, and they're teaching approaches, and this brings more money into schools, things of that. So I think that's a good thing. I also think that to support our businesses, we want to see that as many people in the world are conversant with, familiar with the things that are important to us. It doesn't mean you have to do everything our way, but if you're going to have a U.S. business client, understand that this person is going to be interested in the transparency and the security of the transaction. That he or she is going to be able to get the product into the country without having to pay exorbitant fees to get it, things of that nature. So that's extremely important. On the issue of corporate social responsibility, I feel really strongly on this one. I think nobody in the world does it as well as U.S. companies, period. Okay, I have been all over, and I shouldn't say the world, okay, that's an exaggeration, because I told you I only do the Western Hemisphere. There isn't anybody in the Western Hemisphere who does it as good. It's not that nobody does it better, nobody does it as well as we do. And I don't care if it's sponsoring a local soccer team or putting pencils in kids' hands, but when you take a look at, and I'm not going to give you the names of corporations, okay, but burn centers for children, support for parents whose kids have cancer. And this is part of the operation. You build this from the ground up. And it's not just, and I'm kind of proud of this too, it's not just the companies that do this. We have, it's not that we have a military presence in Latin America, but our militaries do a lot of joint operations and so forth as part of what they do. Maybe they leave a country and build a school. These are good things. And also, if you're in a country and you've got a burn center, which is, it's a hospital for children, and I've seen this, and generally these are young kids, 4, 5, 6 years old, who's been scalded by hot water. I think it's the single largest culprit. You don't fix these kids up in 6 months or a year. I mean, these are 10, 12-year periods. And the corporations fund these things so the care is there the whole time. That is remarkable. It also saves resources to the country in which these things are taking place. So again, but it doesn't make any difference, as I said, whether it's a soccer team that you're sponsoring, it all has value. And I think that it really contributes to a better image of U.S. companies, which, now I'll get on my soapbox a bit, which I probably shouldn't do, but the hemisphere is democratic, Okay, we have democratically elected officials all over the hemisphere, with an exception or two. And not everybody is a huge fan of our foreign policy, nor are we of theirs. I mean, there are differences, and you're democracies, and you can sit and talk about these things and debate them. But don't take, if you're opposed to something when the government-to-government base, don't take it out of the U.S. company. You got to remember that the U.S. company is providing not only jobs for your people, but you've got the social benefit that goes along, which is, creating jobs is a good thing. That is a social benefit. There's some studies that have been done by American chambers of commerce in various Latin American countries, talking about what's the total value of a commercial relationship with the United States, take it even more broad, of a relationship with the United States. You take a look at Central America. What's the value of remittances? That's money coming in off the U.S. economy that goes to these countries. And it's really, it's in the billions of dollars, in any given country. And when you start adding that up, remittances, the value of exports to the United States market, the value of the corporate social responsibility, the value of foreign aid in a given country, that could be the equivalent of well over half of your GDP. Wow. In a given country. And I think we need an appreciation. I wish it were more greatly appreciated sometimes than it is. But I am a huge believer in the value of U.S. business, and I also think that our corporations, not only socially, but also economically, they pay taxes, which is a phenomenon that hasn't reached the whole world yet, And our companies, by and large, are excellent examples of that.
Right. A moment ago, we talked a little bit about technology and it changing the way business is done between countries. How do there's a lot of information that's available to a U.S. business if they can find it. What are ways in which you think that, whether it's your group, the Department of Commerce, or it's schools or it's libraries, should be working together to get this information about Paraguay, about Uruguay, about how to do business in Colombia or Brazil? How do we get that out to the small and medium-sized businesses?
Well, I can tell you that I think in this century tax money is well spent, and that of the folks in Indiana or wherever it might be. We have a pretty extensive, it's a lean and mean network across the United States. I think we've got a little over 100 offices across the United States, and about the same number around the world. Our embassies, our commercial attaches, and these are Commerce Department employees working in an embassy, they all work for Secretary Locke, they prepare country reports, marketing reports, which come back to the States, and they're accessible. You can get all this information online. We have our U.S. Export Assistance Centers, and this is our domestic office network, with specialists who are out there calling on clients and saying, have you thought about this, or what are you thinking about, how can we support you? We've got a number of services that we provide, and yes, there's a fee attached to something, but it's really nominal. You can use some of our commercial operations overseas for a small fee, basically as your office abroad when you're traveling. We put on a full set of promotion activities. We put on a lot of promotional activities. Participate in trade fairs, large ones like the Paris Air Show or Farm Bureau, things like that. Smaller regional fairs that we participate in, with the trade missions. The department has been way out in front on trade missions, reconstruction missions to the Middle East. Which, excuse me, I digress here a second, but you asked about security issues, and I think you would find that U.S. firms are going to the Middle East, they're going to Iraq, they're going to places like Afghanistan and Pakistan to help rebuild those countries. So, we are involved. But the point is, we have an extensive network. States have extensive networks. You have your economic development agency. Maybe the name changes from state to state, but it's that concept. So I think that's, most of that information is available online today.
Do you think that the perception is that information is available to small and medium businesses as well as the large businesses?
That's a good question, because the large businesses know it's there.
Yeah.
Okay, the small businesses very well may not know it's there. So that's our job, and that's what my colleagues and I work on as part of what we do when we're going out and going to small business seminars or talking to folks at historically black colleges and universities, minority civil institutions. These are the types of things that we need to bring out. And to do that also, we bring in colleagues from small business administration. At the department we have 12 bureaus.
Mm-hmm.
One of those is the Economic Development Agency Administration in the Department of Commerce, EDA, which is, and this is kind of an interesting, well, I'll get to this other part in a second. And the Minority Business Development Agency, MBDA. We've come to the realization that the department has incredible resources. You know, I don't know what people think about when they think about the Department of Commerce, but you probably think trade. You know, I mean, that's what commerce is. It's buying and selling. But we have the Census Bureau. We have the Patent and Trademark Office. We have the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is the old Bureau of Standards, right? Telecommunications and Information Administration. The largest part of our budget, which is National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. We have our own satellite service. We have a uniform service at the Department of Commerce. We have admirals, you know. We have people running ships and hurricane hunters and all of that. How do we bring those resources in to help companies now and countries? Because one of my favorite examples, and the one that we're beginning to have some success with, is the Economic Development Agency. It's U.S. focused, as it should be. Their idea is to strengthen communities, especially in depressed areas, or you've got a base reallocation or closing problem, a BRAC issue. They've learned a lot of lessons over the years. How do we bring those to play in foreign countries? At this conference here, a lot of it focuses on the Caribbean. Okay, these are very small communities, small nations rather, smaller than maybe Fairfax County, Virginia, which is where I happen to live. Maybe grandiose federal programs aren't that good, but what has been done at a community level using something like an EDA? What are the lessons learned there, and try to engage that?
Well, that pretty much covers everything that I was hoping to kind of get at, and all that. I mean, I think the challenge. I'm sorry.
No, he said, "Do you salsa?"
Oh, I can't. I sat still as long as I could, and then I got to get it out there. No, I guess that the challenge, and I've always said this, is, you know, how do we take the ingenuity and the energy of the United States, of the people and the businesses and all that, and how do we export that? You know, because I think that as we take that and take it out into the world, whether it's through education or business development or just going out and meeting people and talking to people, that good things will come of that. And what I'm hearing both from this administration, you know, with the export is that the recognition that it's not just about selling more products, but it's about creating more relationships.
Yeah, but keeping in mind, I think that any administration in any country wants to create jobs for its citizens,
right,
and wants to improve, you know, wants to grow the economy and improve the welfare of our citizens. Clearly, that's what the president wants to do.
Oh, absolutely.
But at the same time, we'll be better at it if we can help our colleagues over there strengthen their economies, because our advantage is going to end up being in the export of higher tech products and higher tech services. And so they have to be able to, you know, have a platform that allows them to begin to think down the road and focus on what they need and buy it here.
Well, and one of the things that I keep trying to figure out is how to do STEM, you know, the science, technology, engineering, and math, and how to bring that into play with business. Because so many times business is over here and all the STEM stuff is over here, and we've got to find a way
so
to...
let me just give you a challenge. This has to be the last question, but let me give you a challenge on this, which is, I think you're right. That is and it's not just those areas of expertise, but how do you bring local development agencies into this? How do you bring the academic institutions into it? How do you bring the government into it? How do you bring the NGOs into it? And I think this is something that we ought to be able to sit down and, go up to Bloomington and sit down and have a good long conversation.
You've got it.
Absolutely.
Okay,
We'll
ma'am.
set the
Say before
dates.
you